As with all episodes of Churches Canceled, this episode is for entertainment purposes only. We're not offering any medical advice, certainly not telling anyone to consume anything. And again, we aren't doctors. We're not faith healers. We're
Well,
not
you're a
soothsayers.
doctor.
Well,
Dr.
yes,
D. Bombay.
that's correct, but not that kind of.
Not a
I'm
medical doctor.
Yeah, I'm a doctor of emeritology. That's a different subject. So I just wanted to make sure that we clarify and disclaim this episode is for entertainment purposes only. This episode doesn't even contain our own opinions. This is a scripted for entertainment only episode. And
That's right.
Hold on one second. That's it? We're covered? Okay. Legal says we're good. So
Perfect.
Yep.
Welcome to Churches Canceled. I am your co-host, Brett. Here with my co-host, Snoop Lion. What's up, Snoop?
For those of you who are uninitiated, Snoop Lion is Snoop Dogg's name when he did that one reggae album. So
He'll always be Snoop Lion to me.
Yeah, he did a song with Eddie Murphy. I think it was called Red Light or something like that. And it came out.
Don't remember it.
Huh?
Don't remember it.
Well, you'll remember this. We were staying at some hotel that doesn't exist in Austin anymore. It's now a 5-level self-storage.
Yeah.
And it was when we went down there to get an apartment. And I kept listening to the song. And at some point, you rolled over in your bed and you're like, could you shut that dang thing off? Because I just kept listening to the song. I liked it a lot. But today's subject, so in this podcast, we do this interesting thing where 1 week we address a church scandal or a scandal within the Christian world, if you want to say that. And then in the opposing weeks, we cover a subject. Now, my goal, I think I could speak for Brett here too, and say is our goal isn't to criticize the gospel. It's to criticize the way Christians, when we come together as the church, how we do some silly things. And my goal isn't to ruin anybody's faith. My goal is to simply, speaking openly here, a lot of the thing that inspired me to do this podcast was watching people that I loved deconstruct, deconvert, leaving the faith, and never for a reason that I thought was reasonable or that was good, because of course I'm never going to find any reason reasonable or good. But I realized that it might take an individual like myself and Brett to address some of these issues in a way that's, whatever, to kind of get through them. So today we're going to be talking about cannabis. And it's a very interesting subject.
Marijuana.
That's right. And I think if we were doing this podcast 10 years ago, the question we would be asking is, should Christians support legalization? And in the show notes below, I'll have a clip from none other than John Piper.
Watch that. It's a good one.
Yeah, talking about why. And credit to John Piper for being open-minded and honest.
Mm-hmm.
About some things, not open and honest, like open-minded about a lot of things, but that's fine. I'll take it where we can get it.
Right.
And in this clip, which is I think it's about 13 years old, he talks about he knows somebody who had a severe injury, and the only way that they could treat it was with cannabis. And so he in that regard, I don't think he really answers the question straightforwardly, but essentially says, yeah, maybe medical cannabis should be a thing that's legal. And why don't you kind of set us up and take us, set us down the path of where you think we're going?
Yeah, I'll set us on the path here, but first I want to take a moment for our church cliche of the week.
Yeah, we can't get started without that.
And this is the perfect moment to do this church cliche, because we're going to be talking about a topic here that is controversial. We're talking about cannabis in the church. And we're going to say some things that are going to make some people uncomfortable. But I just really want to invite everyone to join me in just leaning into this topic. I just think we could lean gently in, but not just gently, but aggressively.
Correct.
Gently, aggressively into the forwardly into this topic, and just let the Spirit lead us into it.
Yeah, don't even lean into it. Punch into it. Take the hill.
Well, I mean, I want to lean. I mean, I want to lean like really far. I want to really lean, but I don't want to walk yet.
Okay.
I want to do less than that. I'd like to do less than walk,
but not crawl.
A little bit. Yeah, but well, not crawl either. Just a little bit more than standing straight up. Just a tiny bit of momentum.
Yes.
Into this topic we're talking about.
So, Michael Jackson, Thriller, leaning into things.
That is precisely what we are aiming for. Lean into it like Michael Jack.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. So that's my church cliche for the week. I just I got to make fun of that. The leaning in. Like,
right.
You're not even stepping into it. It's so non-committal. So yeah, this week.
Yeah. No. Continue.
I'm talking about cannabis in the church.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the John Piper clip where he says he may feel that it could be useful for medicinal purposes.
Yeah,
and he kind of leaves it at that.
And I would say that maybe I was jumping the shark there a little too excited, but just being honest, I'm for the decriminalization of all things, not just drugs. And I think that
things. Wow.
Yeah, and I've said this before on this podcast. I'm not ashamed. My pastor is Ron Paul, right? So if I had a pastor, I do, but I would say Ron Paul's up there. And famously in 2008, he was in South Carolina at the debate and said, well, if we decriminalize cocaine tomorrow, are you guys going to start doing cocaine? And the crowd cheered. So I thought that was, I don't know if that meant that they were going to or not, but so the reason this conversation is pertinent now is I think it's a conclusion that's foregone as to whether or not legalization is going to happen with cannabis and other drugs. I think maybe later in this podcast we'll start using the word medicine to refer to them, but for now we'll say drugs. So it's a foregone conclusion. It's starting already with cities like Denver and Portland. Not just cannabis, but psilocybin is legal in those regions. And so the argument that is often made from the church perspective, which was a pretty fair argument, which was we ought to be as Christians law abiding. Now, I think Christians in the West use that as a defense against a lot of things, and it's probably accurate against a handful of things. But if they lived in other parts of the world and they were Christians, they might not hold that sentiment so tightly. I think it's easy to hold that in the West. I think it's not so easy to hold that outside of this, outside of the West. And, there's I think it's called a 1040 or 240. I forget what it is, but there's a 1090. I don't know what it was, but it's basically that, by 2030, which is not that far away, and we're just 7 years away from 2030, the majority of Christians in the globe will not be in the West. It will not be in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, and wherever. I mean, Germany, those countries. It's not going to be Europe. It's going to be below the equator. It's going to be Africa, Asia, South America. And so that argument to me is it's a foregone conclusion at this point in my mind that, it doesn't matter whether Christians should or should not support legalization. It's happening. So I think, if we were having the conversation 15 years ago, that's maybe where we would start, but we're not going to start there.
We're not asking if it's illegal or not
because it's happening already.
It's basically legal.
Yeah. And
even in states where it's illegal and not decriminalized, you can still buy cannabis products of other natures.
Yeah, so it's 2018's Farm Bill as signed into law by the great orange man, Donald Trump. legalized many, many forms of cannabis. And this is always a belief that I've held and other people thought was like, no, 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 like, more lefty types are like, well, the reason they don't legalize it, man, is because like you can't make any money because um, you can't go get you can't own it,
Hmm.
you can't own the IP. And I'm like, yeah, but the point is you can't own the IP of vitamin C, but somebody's out there selling you. There's not one, there's not just
Hmm.
one company selling vitamin C. There's 1,000 of them, right?
Right.
So I think there's plenty of money to be made. And so that's what that argument ever worked for me. But in the context of church, the first argument was, well, it's illegal, so we can't even broach the subject. That's a foregone conclusion now.
Right.
Um,
Well, so what should the
so
question be now? Is the question, is it sinful to be a Christian and use cannabis? Is sinful the right word? What questions do we
well,
want to ask?
I think the next question is it addictive? Or, so the first one was, but it's illegal. And then it became, but it's addictive, or it's a
Uh-huh.
gateway drug.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's
so I have an article here from Psychology Today, and it will be linked in the description. And I have a couple other videos from a guy named Dr. Carl Hart, who says that our concept or understanding of addiction is entirely incorrect. And I've followed his work a lot. Now, the difficulty with Dr. Carl Hart that I have is he's a black guy with a receding hairline and dreadlocks and a missing tooth. So when you talk about a guy who's like, you can use heroin casually, he doesn't really present himself as but he speaks eloquently about the subject and he kind of understands what he's saying. And there's another article here that kind of agrees with that. And what these articles and Dr. Carl Hart is saying is that, well, addiction is less of an issue of substance abuse, and it's more of a go figure, an issue of a lack of community, and that
right.
people lack community. And I think that the church exists to create community. And I don't hold the view that the point of church on Sunday morning is about worship songs and Bible teaching. I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that we shouldn't do that. I'm just saying I don't think that's the point. The point is gathering of the saints, community, being with your people. I think that's the point. And so if the church does a good job of addressing community and developing community and creating a safe space for people to come and be as they are, come as you are, leave transformed, but come as you are. I think that once we have that perspective, I think we can toss out the concept that it's addictive or that it's a gateway drug. I think that
Yeah.
when people use drugs, in my view, I think it depends. The question is, how are you using it?
Yeah.
You
I
know,
want to I want to talk about the gateway drug idea. I've heard that a lot from
please.
people that marijuana is a gateway drug. If you start using marijuana, you're going to end up doing crack, shooting up heroin through a dirty needle in a back alley. You know, that's what people think marijuana is going to do to you. Dr. Carl Hart had one of his comments on that was, well, you don't get the withdrawals that you would, especially not with marijuana, because
True.
cannabis stays in your system for so long that your body is naturally weans itself off of it. So you don't have the withdrawals that you would have with, like, if you're massively addicted to alcohol or even cocaine and whatever else.
I
The
just want to point something out that was interesting to me was that one of the reasons why during the events of 2020 liquor stores remained open and they were exempt from closure was there was a very straightforward understanding on the part of the government that said if we close them, we're going to have an entire other pandemic or epidemic on our hand of people who are addicted to alcohol withdrawing and not being able to satiate their need to consume. And so I think it's interesting it's within the context of most churches that I would attend, the consumption of alcohol is viewed as a matter of liberty. So I think that's an
mhm.
interesting, and we've seen pastors just recently in the last 10 years having to go to alcohol treatment centers because they had an alcohol problem. So
Yeah, so definitely is not as addictive as alcohol. You would have the withdrawals that you would with alcohol. As far as being a gateway drug, I know Dr. Carl Hart said that the majority of cannabis users never go on to use any other type of drug from what studies have revealed. And I always said it like this to people: if you took a room, nothing in it, you just put me in it, and you gave me cannabis, and I got high, and then there was all these other drugs laying out that I could just access and try if I wanted to, I would never get high on cannabis, look at the other drugs and go, I should try some of that too. Like,
Right.
it just doesn't work that way, where like it doesn't turn you into some fiend where you have to get more and more of a high.
Right. And I think it might be, edifying at this juncture to say this much. I personally have never, until the 2018 legalization of certain types of cannabis products, or I think hemp would be the more accurate term in that regard. Um, is I never tried anything, and this just it's not some sort of spiritual reason. It's not because I'm not, but I'm just saying I'm not some homeschool kid who's just like I'm never gonna do it because I'm sanctified. VeggieTales is satanic. It was never that. It was just I have asthma, and I was concerned if I smoked something
Uh-huh.
that I was gonna have an asthma attack, and then I'm gonna be with my buddies who are high as a kite, and then I have to explain to my parents that I'm high, and then what happened, and then it's like I have to I have to go to the ER, and then they're gonna be like, "Don't call an ambulance, we have drugs." So it was just that was always a concern, and I think that I'll say openly now that I use some of the stuff that is federally legal, and gummies, and hey, my other option was painkillers that are I already have
Yeah.
some I had to have an emergency surgery in 2020, and the downstream consequences of that is I have some lasting pain, and I started using some of these products to help deal with the pain because the other option was really really bad, like the kinds of prescription drugs that people are like, hey, I can't get enough from my doctor anymore, so now I'm turning to street heroin,
Right.
black
Right.
tar, and I'm freebasing black. So like that's like the situation. So
It was take a gummy or free base black tar. That's what we were up against.
basically it was just like I was looking for a spoon, and I was like, I'm gonna just like, but no, like, and so I kind of weighed my options, and I just want to throw this in here also, like I'll never put anybody into a group, but particularly whites, because I think it just happens so often it's unfair. But the only time I will do it,
Thank you.
yeah, no, I think I've addressed this in the politics and race episode and all that other stuff, and I've addressed this a couple times. But the only time I do this is when it comes to natural remedies, and it's always like, hey Kyle, I've already heard of ashwagandha, from my grandmother, because it came. Do you think someone named Dave discovered ashwagandha, or someone named Prakash, right? And so as someone who, someone in one of my parents works in medical research, and they're always like, don't take any prescription. And they work in medical research, and
Wow.
that's just their conclusion. Is like, don't,
Mm-hmm.
if you can avoid taking a pharmaceutical, avoid it. So I come from a very conservative family of evangelical Christian conservative Republicans. Okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is a liberal's worst nightmare. My family, right? Brown educated people with money who are like, no. Well, we like the, we're like, but this group of people is also like, well, if your choices are loading up on Tylenol every night, which is going to have a
Mm-hmm.
negative effect on your liver, or hitting this thing that popping a gummy that comes out of the ground that is there. I think this might be a good time to say that, hey, your brain has these things called cannabinoid receptors. Why don't you tell us about cannabinoid receptors, Brett?
So I'm no expert on cannabinoid receptors, but the gist of it that I understand is that our brain has these built-in stations, if you will, in our brain that are there specifically to receive the chemicals that are found in the cannabinoids and the effect that has on the brain. That's
Right.
about as technical as I can get. Is that those are there and they're by design. You don't find the same thing for, say, alcohol. There's no built-in station in our brain meant to receive the signals that our brain sends out when we drink. It's not there. So it's an interesting question. Like, why would that be built in us as believers, believing in God who created us for a purpose and a reason and design? Why are those there if we're not intended to receive the signal that the cannabis is going to give us when we take it?
Yeah. And, the reason I think that's interesting is I was having this conversation with an older Christian person, and they said, yeah, I had a lot of issues and this is kind of a time when I'll say, there's a ton of evidence that suggests that cannabis has tons, not just one, but several applications, that medical applications where it can solve or treat various ailments. And when that person was like, they were struggling with, hey, I'm using this thing, is this the right thing for me to be doing? And when I said, or it was actually their some that they knew told them, well, your brain has cannabinoid receptors, that clicked for them. They go, well, if my brain has this thing to receive it. And so I'll make the argument that God in his infinite wisdom and I'm not a Calvinist, but he created an earth and he created beings to worship him. And he knew that they would defy him in the Garden of Eden, and that would break the shalom of the earth, his original design of the earth, and that they would need medicines. And he just did this fancy thing where he just said, well, here are the medicines for you, right? You don't need Bayer or Pfizer.
Look at that.
You don't need Bayer or Pfizer or Moderna, right? You probably do. I'm not saying don't take medicine. I'm actually not one of those people, but I am saying that he put it there for your consumption. Now, let me ask you an interesting question. There are some people who speculate that the early church, the church in Acts, for instance, that when they were passing out communion, that they were passing out shrooms, right? And that there's a lot of people who believe that, the burning bush was not actually on fire, that someone else was a little on fire a little bit before, and that there's a group of people who believe that a lot of them, God talking to people, chariots of fire, all of that stuff. Well, some people believe chariots of fire mean spaceships, and I might be one of those people. But there's another group of people who are less quirky and quacky who think that some of that is simply people in the Bible in biblical times using this to connect with the Holy Spirit. Now, where do you lean in that regard?
Man, it's not out of the realm of possible. I don't know that anyone who calls themselves a Bible scholar and actually has the credentials to back it up would say there's evidence for that in the Bible. But of course, who would ever admit that if it were true and it could be proven that maybe some of these guys connecting with God, having visions, like you said, the burning bush, maybe they had an assist from a natural plant element that led them there. I don't know. I think it's possible. I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah, nor am I. And here's what I would say. If you had asked me just 1 year ago, Danny, or in this case, Snoopline.
1 year ago, he didn't refer to himself as that, though.
Yeah. How would you quantify your faith? And I would say, I've experienced real miracles in my life. I've never had I've been going to church. I've been a Christian. I would call myself a Christian for a long time, but I've never had one of those breakout spiritual experiences where I felt like I was contacted or whatever, however you want to quantify that. And I would have told you that my faith exists as 99.9%, and that every day I live, every miracle I experience, it adds a 9. But I would say
Mhm.
it's never going to roll over to 100. And then a few months ago, you came to visit, and we just went into a shop, and you're like, I need something to help me go to sleep tonight, and I bought something, and I took the rest of it back to my house, and I woke up, and we had a couple of cocktails, and I for some reason got a severe migraine,
Mm.
and so I'm trying to sleep it off, and so I was like, oh, you know what, I did buy this stuff, I'll pop one of them, so I hit one of them. Hour later, I'm still awake. It's not really working, so I hit another one, and then I hit the oopsie daisy. And what took place, I don't want to get into the details of it, but I would say it's um, I can't deny that what happened was a Pentecostal experience that in I could have never that I would have never predicted flipped me from 99.9 in a continuum to 100.
Wow, really?
Yeah, where and I would have never said like I have any doubt. I would just say no, like that little 0.001% of whatever that is doubt. That's the faith. That's where the faith exists, right? And whatever that experience was, um, changed my attitude about life. Honestly, it changed my attitude about being spiritual, and it changed my attitude about church. It changed my attitude about a lot of things. And I wonder if there's a lot of, and maybe we'll get into this. I think we're going to do our ad read right now, and then we'll maybe get into this in our next segment. But I think we need to start asking the question, as we were saying at the beginning, like, what is the question? Is this stuff medicine from God? Is that
Could it be
is that
medicine?
is this could it be? So,
What's
the
our ad for the day?
well, so the
Did we get a
difficulty
new
of doing
sponsor?
yeah, so the difficulty of doing an episode like this is that we're not going to be able to make any money from YouTube ad rev. But
No.
our friends over at Dick Recruiter have a new service, and
What?
they have selected us as the first podcast to advertise it. It's incredible.
Whoa. The Dick
Yeah,
Recruiter, that was already just a
yeah, it's
smashing,
incredible. Yeah.
smashing application, I would say.
So this new service from Dick Recruiter is called Diversity on Demand.
Mm.
If you're a ministry, if you're a church, if you're a
Hmm.
private company, and you need a black or brown face to agree with what you're saying,
Mm.
Diversity on Demand is here to service that need. Like Dick Recruiter, Diversity on Demand fulfills sensitive staffing needs.
Ah.
The brown and black people
Mm.
of Diversity on Demand understand it's important to be discreet. If a role needs a diverse face, Diversity on Demand will help staff that role with a diverse face that understands not to get in white or Asian people's way. Diversity on Demand's diverse commitment is to never suing anyone for wrongful termination and never
Good.
doing anything other than being the face of a prominent role. Now, if you use promo code canceled, if you go to Dick Recruiter, if you go to diversity.dickrecruiter.co and use promo code canceled, not only will you get 30% off your first placement,
Whoa.
you will get a free N-word pass. That's included that's included with our thing. It's incredible.
What a deal.
What a
Oh.
deal. That's
Oh my gosh.
diversity.dickrecruiter.co. It's an
Wow.
incredible service. I
Diversity
mean,
on demand.
yeah, there's a lot of churches, businesses, ministries out there that are suffering because they need to embrace
Representation.
representation, DEI, diversity, equity,
Mhm.
inclusion, but that might take them off mission. And then if that person has a problem, they could get sued. They fixed all of these problems with one service where you have a person that is black or brown, black or Hispanic. They're not
Mhm.
going to get in the way of the people doing the work, the whites and Asians, right?
Mhm.
They're just going to sit there and say what you need them to say. with an understanding they're never going to sue you for wrongful termination. It's a fantastic service.
Wow.
And
Really? Yeah.
an Edward Pass. Come on.
Who could turn down that offer from Diversity on Demand? Thank you for their sponsorship.
Of course. And we're doing an episode of cannabis. It's complicated to find someone who's going to sponsor the episode so we can support the efforts of the show. And of course, Dick Recruiter and Diversity on Demand, their new service. It's incredible that those people stepped up to support our mission here of spreading the words that we spread.
Well, I just wanted to briefly give a bit of my own background as we're getting more into this. So just for context.
I think you mean testimony, don't you?
A bit of my testimony. Yeah.
Okay.
For context here. So we were going through, I was kind of doing some research looking for what Christians think about cannabis. You sent me a YouTube video of some young guys on a podcast. It was called like Bless God or something like that.
Yeah, so that's Ruslan of Bless God Studios. Ruslan is a Christian hip hop artist, and his podcast is actually what inspired this part of this show, because he would just start addressing cultural issues from the perspective of a Christian. He's a seasoned veteran of the game. And I appreciate a lot of his I appreciate a lot of his content. Doesn't mean I agree with him all the time. I disagree with him a lot of the time. But I just appreciate that there's a guy who isn't a cheese ball, who's addressing these issues and and just not shying away from the hard stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was watching that, and they're,
I think we commented on that video. I think you commented with the Church is Canceled account, which is very good. I'm glad you did that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of had the theory of maybe it's okay. They were responding to another video, but maybe it's okay in small doses if you could just do it for medical purposes and not to get high and not get addicted. Very restrictive.
They were responding to the video from this other guy doing a podcast. I lost his name here.
Jamal Bryant.
Jamal Bryant of New Birth, Atlanta. And he said in this other podcast, he was saying that, they're the largest Black landowning church in Georgia, and that he wanted to start a cannabis farm on his church, on the church's property, to help young Black men have industry and learn a trade and all that other stuff. And I thought that was great. And then they had other opinions, but
they seem to not like it, basically. They said that the church should not do that. Christians shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
So in doing that research, I was looking for what Christians' opinion was, what the kind of general evangelical modern day Christian opinion on cannabis use is, and it's pretty negative.
Right.
The overall theme is that in some way, use of marijuana is a sin. And so I want to give my background on that. Is I understand where those folks are coming from. I come out of a culture where any type of substance you may put in your body that alters your mind is a sin. Because there's a scripture that I think is read incorrectly, but it says to be sober minded. That's one of the translations. Really more translates to like be alert, be thinking clearly, be watchful. Doesn't have anything to do with sobriety from drugs. But that's referenced a lot by Christians. And I understand that. That's kind of what I was taught as I got deeper into the evangelical Assemblies of God Pentecostal denomination.
Well, to be entirely fair to them and to everyone, if there's any way that I can, proof text a scripture and do eisegesis, I'm going to take the opportunity, right? Because I'm a hypocrite. So if I'm just listen, a lot of lovely Christian people view the Bible not as they should. They view it as a cudgel to hit other people over their head with it, and tell them how they ought to proceed with their life. And I think that's the wrong way to view it. But if we're going to play the game, let's play the game, baby. Let's do exegesis. Let's just, hey, we need this to say you can't do something I don't like.
Yeah.
So let's do it. You're driving a Camry. It says 1 accord, right? It says 1 accord.
You'd be being an Accord instead.
That's right. But you bought a Camry.
Get out of that Toyota.
That's right. That's not what he wants for your life. He has a plan for you.
Doing that exegesis.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Driving your Ford Taurus.
So that's kind of the research. Through my research, what I found is how the church feels about cannabis use. In general, I think it's pretty negative. And I think
agree with that.
I don't think it has anything to do with legality, as you said. I don't think it has anything to do with can it get you addicted, as we've covered, because it's been proven it really can't. I think the only thing that some Christians acknowledge is the last part is it medicine we're going to talk about here, is that some Christians are starting to agree, if used properly, if not abused, like anything else can be abused, this may have some medical benefits.
Correct. Now, I would add to that and say, our world is suffering a crisis of depression, anxiety, and addiction to other things, alcohol addiction. There are study after study after study that says psilocybin usage. Now, this episode is specifically about cannabis, but I think the conclusion kind of runs concurrent with that, people, and, I think you made reference to Craig Gross, the founder of Triple X Church, who is now an advocate of the use.
I didn't, but I wanted to make reference to him.
Well, you made reference to me to him. That's what I meant. He is now I think it's not unreasonable to say, an advocate of the use of these things as medicine. And the way he described it it was formerly called, now it's called, I think it's all over, but it used to be called Bad Christian, which, again, another thing that kind of inspired me to call you up and say we should do a podcast was, he talked about how people would come, I think it was called Rainbow Ridge. It was like some sort of retreat center that him and his family lived at for 6 or 7 months or something like that, for a year, I forget. And what they would do is people would come there with something, they would discuss it. Someone would lead them through a guided meditation where they would consume psilocybin or something like that. And they would do it one time. They would have a revelation. It would help them course correct. Now, this is that's in the Christian church world, I guess. But you can look at secular studies that say, no, like people who are severely depressed hit psilocybin one time. They do, they have, one period of time. It's not an ongoing treatment. They take it once and they turn it around. People who are severely addicted to alcohol, same thing. So if I put the two together, some, weird people who say Christians might have been using this stuff in biblical time, burning bush, all that stuff. But then I, put that over in its box. Danny, I, talk about box theology, where it's like, I don't know if this fits yet, but I'm going to put this in the box, put it on the shelf, worry about it later, because it doesn't fit anywhere. But then I start looking at the secular data. The secular data is starting to say that, this is, and the church is always 15 years late to every issue.
Yeah.
And we're now addressing, we need to be concerned with people's mental health. And I am simply posing the hypothesis, or we might say hypotenuse, the hypothesis that perhaps God in his infinite wisdom as our creator, before he set the pillars of the earth, understood that we would sin, and Eve, a woman, of course.
He may have done that after the pillars of the earth.
Well, who knows? Okay. He created these things to help us, get in touch with, if we are and so in the course of my experience, I started having Pentecostal spiritual experiences, something I never experienced before in my life.
Yeah.
And I hit up a pastor friend of mine because I was concerned that this was a problem. And he said, and this was, his impression was that I actually hit up two pastors. One pastor who thinks I'm kidding all the time, and I am kidding most of the time, was just like, I don't know, man. Sounds cool. And the other one was like, well, you can't discount the experience as like, oh, I just dreamed it, even though I would have said it existed in some sort of dream state. But what he would say is, and what he said was, listen, man, you have to ask the question is, did this remove some sort of mental block in your brain that you were unable to release yourself to have this experience otherwise? And all that the gummies did, and this is all the gummies did was remove that part of your brain or your spirit or whatever, and it lets you fully experience what God has for people to fully experience. And I wonder if the church, 15 years late to everything, is going to figure out sooner than later, oh, God put this stuff on this planet as medicine for us to address these issues of, well, why isn't like stress and depression, anxiety, it's not really addressed in the Bible? Because they were getting ripped on shrooms. Like, you sad, Paul? Hit this. And then, like that. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that might be the situation. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about like intent, and maybe
Yes.
this is a very Christian word, stewardship, right? So if God gave us this plant that has these side
medicinal
effects,
qualities,
positive, and these medicinal qualities, we have to be good stewards of that. And so I think that's something that's important. To go back to Craig Gross, I met Craig years ago. He spoke in chapel at North Central University. That's back when he was known as the porn pastor. And he was talking about porn addiction, and how his ministry worked to help people there. That I got connected. When I met him, he connected me with his ministry, and I actually did ministry inside of a porn convention.
Ministry.
With the message being Jesus loves porn stars. Yeah. And that was it. And so Craig has always had a way of pushing the envelope to the next issue and a little bit further on. So now he's stepped away from Triple X Church. He has started ChristianCannabis.com, where I love the names. It's like, they name the strain. It'll be like the resurrection strain. And
Stop
yeah.
it.
Yeah, the holy roller, all this stuff.
Okay, I dig it. So I can dig it.
It's pretty funny. He said they're coming out with edibles that are in communion wafer form.
Stop it.
Okay. Well, but I talk about him because when I listen to him talk about cannabis, it's very intentional, and it sounds like a guy who's a good steward. It to the point where I'm listening to him talk about how he uses marijuana and psilocybin and other hallucinogens. I'm thinking, I'm such a terrible steward of not just drugs, but just all the good things I have in my life. Like this is, you can hear the intent is to find healing for people, to find restoration, to get rid of stress, to solve medical issues. That's what his aim is with this thing that could otherwise easily be abused. And I think that's an important thing, is how are we going to steward this thing? And the church just can't quite figure that out yet.
And so the one word I would latch on to there, or lean into,
oh boy,
is not stewardship, but intention. Mm-hmm. Now, I think when people perhaps rightfully criticize gateway drug addiction, all those other criticisms, I think that we have the wrong problem. We're addressing the wrong issue, and the issue isn't that. The issue is intention. So if you're I'm going to quote a Bible verse, probably wrong application here, but God looks at the inside, not the outside, right? So if our intention is escapism, when we have a cocktail, which I don't drink anymore, but just a health choice that I made, or if we are having the intention of I need to escape from a feeling, and we consume something to escape from that feeling, I actually started agreeing with the conservative evangelical prescription there that
I do as
this is wrong. You shouldn't do that. You should be sober minded, and that. I actually agree with that. There,
Yeah.
when we stop talking about it as a drug and we start talking about it as a medicine, and cannabis has properties of helping with inflammation and listen, the ancients,
Glaucoma,
yeah, like
cancer.
ancients, right? Ancients were telling us, well, inflammation is the cause of a lot of your problems. And that was like, the scientists came along in the 40s and 50s, like these idiots. But in 2022, they're saying, well, actually, most of your issues come from inflammation. It's like, and oh, sorry, the government told us for 30 years to consume tons of carbs, and then they're like, sorry, carbs cause inflammation, and it causes heart disease and all these other problems.
Obesity.
Yeah. And I'm actually in the process as we speak of filing a class action against the USDA for forcing me to eat tons of chicken Alfredo. They told me to eat plates and plates and plates of chicken Alfredo and to consume minimal fats, when it turns out it's literally the opposite. And so I think that there's a reasonable conversation to be had there of why. Now, I would say if you're a child, and that means a teenager, and you're just doing this to get high, probably not good for you, right? And I would even,
spiritually speaking.
Yeah, and I would go further to say physically, because your brain isn't developed until you're 25. It's not fully developed until you're 25. I don't know, like there have been cases and there is academic studies to suggest that cannabis consumption can unlock, or cause is the wrong word, but it can reveal in some situations other further mental health struggles. So I think intentionality, to really sum up everything I believe about these things, is it matters why. And I think that's something that our creator is concerned with. And I think that our consumption of anything, we should start with why. And I never had any sense of guilt or sin or shame when it came to using gummies for back pain, because I knew in my heart, I'm not pursuing anything here other than I just want to go to sleep. I don't want to hurt my liver. And I think this thing that came out of the ground, sure, it's processed into a strawberry banana flavored cheesecake gummy, but ultimately the goal for me was never like, I'm not trying to get blazed, man. Like I'm trying to wake up tomorrow and be productive. And I can't do that without a decent night's sleep and all this other stuff. And so I never felt any guilt or shame about it. But if sometimes, like, if I'd sit down with my buddies and have a couple, too few many cocktails, I'm like, you don't feel like, and then you wake up in the morning, you feel like garbage, and I lose 2 or 3 days of productivity. And so when I put things into that context of intention, and as a spiritual man, a man of faith, a man that is concerned with, maybe one day I'm going to have to answer for my choices, I have no compunction about the usage of any of these things. Whether it's psilocybin, cannabis, or LSD, or any of this stuff, or ketamine. I don't have any compunction about the use of any of these things. I personally not interested in the use of basically anything other than the gummies that are 50 state legal at this point. But if I ever came to a point in life where I was spiritually, emotionally, or otherwise constricted in one way, and I felt like I couldn't, we have this conversation about mental health within the context of church, and there's always people whose response is just have more faith,
just pray about it.
And here's the thing, I'm saying you should do that, and I think there are probably some people for whom this is a persisting problem, and there's now evidence that suggests this isn't actually a chemical imbalance. So the way that the medical field has been treating it for 30 years has been about a chemical imbalance.
Drugs, yeah.
I'm not saying to do them or not do them. I'm not telling anybody what to think or what to feel. I'm just saying there is evidence to suggest that the approach that has been used for 30, 40 years with mental health issues has been, well, you have a chemical imbalance. And so they give you stuff to straighten your chemical imbalance.
Right.
But it turns out that just creates more issues. And I am wondering, and the question I'm posing and the conclusion I'm kind of making here is, perhaps a one-time or two-time use of some of these, whether it's psilocybin or any of the other hallucinogens, guided by a professional. What is a professional in this regard? Who the frick knows how to quantify what a professional is, but guided by somebody who at least has good intentions for you and is with you while you're consuming this and going through it. I wonder if for a lot of people at the end of that, there's going to be radical healing. And if the church is going to be, again, 15 years late to any cultural issue, or part of why churches cancel exists is to perhaps appeal to church leaders to go, instead of being 15 years late to every issue and then being wrong about it and then trying to be countercultural, why don't you make culture? Why don't you do something that the ancient Christians were doing, which is making culture and guiding culture, so then you're not fighting it. The church is constantly at war with culture, and if you don't have to influence culture if you're making it, right? Because it's yours. And so I think this is an opportunity and I'm saying we just have to let the boomers out. The boomers they don't care. We can't help. They can't be helped at this point, right? I'm not saying all of them. I'm just saying any of them that kind of matter, right? As millennials and younger people, I think the Bible authorizes us to take a leadership role here. And I think younger people, like Craig Gross, can impact people by saying, if this is the way you feel, here's a place for you to go. And I think that's what his ministry does now. Yeah. I don't know if they're called a ministry, but whatever it is they're called, right? I think what they do now is direct you to places where you can go and get treatment in this regard. And I know people who are suffering, and I wonder, I'm not going to tell them this, but I'm just saying, I wonder if this is going to be a solution for them in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think much the same. I think that, like you said, to create culture, I think we look at what Jesus did in the Gospels, and he was creating a culture. It wasn't in line with the Romans, and it wasn't in line with the Jewish leaders at the time. He was creating a culture. And I think the error of the church is to say, well, Jesus created that culture. Now it's our job to preserve. We should just be preserving, keep everything the same. The rules that existed back then, everything still applies now, and we have no innovation when that happens. And that is what's keeping us, as you said, 15 years behind. We have to look at it the other way. Instead of saying, well, Jesus created this culture, let's preserve what he created. Maybe just the message was, we need to continue to create in a way that is loving and that is healing. And if we have a substance that can do that with little to no negative side effects that naturally occurs in the earth, where receptors are built into our brain to receive that signal to help us heal, that's something we should really consider and stop demonizing it. We demonize things because we don't understand them, but there's so much literature out there, so much information. We can understand what's going on now, and I think it's good.
Yeah, and I think, I can use this as a parallel, if you will. The church started saying 10, 15 years ago, sex isn't bad. It's just bad outside of the context of marriage. So, again, 15 years late to the party of this is an area where we can be in front and say, this stuff isn't bad for you depending on how you use it. If you use it like medicine, it's not bad. We know that there are people out there who abuse prescription drugs. That's not a new concept, right? So we understand Christians have no problem saying, oh, your doctor prescribed fentanyl for your pain. Don't do it. No, we go, okay, well, you should do it the way it's prescribed to use. And we just hope that they don't get hooked on it. Now, if this other stuff might help you better, or, I'm trying to think of something like some sort of painkiller that, you live in Florida. I mean, you guys had, it's like, you guys used to have those, long before you lived there, but there used to be those OxyContin clinics where you basically just walked in with some doctor who has a medical degree from the Caribbean islands, and he's just like, yeah, it's a pill mill, right?
Oxys, Percocets.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it sounds like that D12 song, Purple Pills, but basically not conclusion, but the to wrap that up is that we understand that you can use Oxy or you can Percocet, they all exist. And if you're like, no one at church will be like, oh, you take OxyContin for pain, like you got in a car accident and the doctor gave it to you.
You're a sinner. Yeah. You're on Vicodin because you just came back from the dentist. How dare you?
Right. And there is no doubt in anybody's mind at this juncture, Christian or otherwise, that some of this stuff is highly addictive and bad for you. There is already a lawsuit. There's a class action against Perkins or whoever that family is that created OxyContin.
Right.
And it's just, so the argument there that has always been used, it's illegal. Well, this is legal, but it's bad for you, right? This is illegal, but good for you. Or maybe not good, but in the context of using it correctly. So I don't know about you, but that kind of wraps up everything I had to say about the subject.
Yeah, I think there was one other thing as you were speaking. I remembered a big part of why have we demonized this thing so much. You mentioned these prescription drugs, Percocet, OxyContin, Vicodin. These are all legal, but they're bad for you, especially when you take too much.
But if you and your buddies are out in Vegas for one of their bachelor parties and you just crush a little up and go up the old the nostrils here, it might be it might help it set in a little quicker.
So legal but bad for you, illegal but good for you. Why is that? Dr. Carl Hart, who we had the video links to, talked about that a little bit, and even about the branding of it as not being cannabis, being called marijuana because of the association with Black and Hispanic communities. Marijuana. That is a part of why it has been illegal for so long and still is. He said, the reasons are not pharmacological reasons why the marijuana, cannabis is illegal. They're political. For so long, we've associated it with communities of people, the ruling class. Yeah, we're going there, Danny. Didn't like. But also that our white evangelical churches didn't like as much.
Well, I think it's easy for evangelicals to identify with the state, and it's much harder for them to identify with like I said, Black guy with the receding hairline and dreadlocks who's missing a tooth, who talks about his occasional heroin usage, which I'm not making any of that up. But by the way, he is a credentialed neuroscientist and he holds PhDs. I mean, he's a PhD from the University of Wyoming. Okay. I feel like when he got it, probably wasn't too hard to get one, but the point is he got it. But his advocacy in this regard, and what you're saying is interesting. And so I just want to clarify something as we're closing this out here. I'm not. This is just my opinion that it's legal but bad for you. That's just my opinion. I'm not a physician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. Brett isn't either. We don't know, but we're just saying there is some evidence to suggest, and we're going to link to those articles in the show notes, and that's a conclusion a person could reasonably draw based on some of the evidence that we're finding. Yeah. And I say all of that because I don't want to get sued, right? Exactly. That's the only reason I'm saying it, because otherwise I think that it's that's that. So, oh, and one last thing before we close this thing out, I just wanted to say, Brett, you're canceled.
Oh, Danny, you are also canceled.
Well, thank you for that. I really do appreciate you saying that.
My pleasure. Join us next time on Church is Canceled.
If we're not dead.